Hello and welcome to the channel. I'm Ayrshark and today we will be covering carriers. Captain skills for them, equipment, setups for them, and maybe how to pick a target. You'll notice that all of my carriers, or all the captains for my carriers, have the same skills for the first points. The reason for that is because they're basically used in every carrier. The air preparation time reduces how long it takes to for your planes to regenerate. So it's pretty much always in use as long as you're using aircraft. The squadron speed basically just makes all of your planes faster. It's not much of a boost, but it's used by everything pretty much all the time. The continuous anti-air damage reduction, always useful, and increased aircraft HP, always useful. I'm pretty sure the game is balanced around your carriers for that tier being pretty much fully upgraded and having these two skills at all times. Now, something like Pyrotechnician works best with the UK carriers, the US carriers, and to an extent the Japanese carriers, as well as the Russians. It's sort of self-explanatory as to what it does. Proximity fuse, good for anything that uses torps. Sight stabilization is good for Japanese, US, and that might be it. The Germans don't need it. The UK carriers could use it, but they don't necessarily need it. And the Russian carriers prefer to attack from longer ranges, so they don't really need it either. Torpedo bombers, great for pretty much anything that uses torpedoes, as it makes it so that you don't need to lead as much. There are certain exceptions to this, or to these, like for the Bearn, you pretty much want interceptor and maybe enhanced reactions. The Bearn is pretty much an anti-carrier carrier. Its fighters are really good. Most of your tech tree carriers don't have great fighters, so you'll just generally not worry about them much. For the German carriers, I strongly recommend the defensive fire expert because German secondaries are good. Always avoid hidden menace. It reduces the speed that your planes return at, which means you're going to lose pretty much all of your planes. The enhanced aircraft armor is potentially useful, but if you have some practice dodging flak, it's not super useful because that only reduces damage taken from flak. The enhanced armor piercing is too little to really matter. The increase to torpedo speed is too small to really matter. Last gasp or improved engine boost could be useful. Engine techies kinda pointless. The direction center for fighters kinda pointless. Secondary armament is kind of not useful. Carriers have good anti-air for the most part. So there are a few exceptions that kind of don't have great anti-air, but usually people don't bother with attacking the carrier, and when they do, they're attacking the carrier, which is you and not other people who are more important to kill off. Repair specialist, kind of pointless. All of the fighter boosting ones sort of not useful except for on the Bjorn. But yeah, US and Japanese are pretty much going to look like this. And this is the only level 21 captain I have, so I can't really show what the others would look like. So, kinda. If we look over at equipment, all of your carriers will have Air Groups Modification 1 that speeds up how fast they return, which is extremely important. Do not run a carrier unless you have this. The engine upgrades, useful. There's no point in going with damage control systems, because chances are you won't be getting set on fire, and if you are, you have more problems than being set on fire. This one could be pretty much whatever. For the Russians and the Germans, I recommend the secondary battery modification, because they have slightly longer range secondaries, and German secondaries are generally good. Torpedo bombers for longer attack time can be useful for if your chosen target dies while you're in the middle of starting an attack run. It gives you a little extra time to pick a different target to attack. The attack aircraft mod, not really important, not super useful either. The torpedo speed is kind of pointless because it provides so little of a boost that if your torpedoes don't already go like 50 knots or higher, then it provides basically nothing, which makes it a complete waste of time. For your whichever one you want more health on, since torpedoes are usually the best damaging type of the aircraft, it's usually torpedo bombers that you want. I'd personally pick whatever you use the most. If you are running Russians, probably the skip bombers if you use a lot of skip bombers, or the attack aircraft. It doesn't really matter, just whatever you're going to be using the most. For the Japanese carriers, I recommend the squadron consumable action thing, because you will heal longer when you use the healing for your torpedo planes, which means you can actually get in the drops. You can get attacked by fighters and basically just shrug it off so that it doesn't matter. Concealment systems, not particularly useful. The flight control modification can be useful on pretty much everything except for the Japanese carriers. It increases the amount of aircraft each of your squadrons has in reserve by, 2. So the fewer aircraft you have, the more useful this will be. For something like the Kaga, it's completely pointless. It also speeds up the regen time, but it's so minor that you might get an extra, like, 4 planes or something per battle, which it's not nothing, but it's not super useful. The extra planes in reserve, however, is. For the Germans, you pretty much, yeah, secondaries, same difference. Russians, you might as well go with secondaries because you have slightly better secondaries than normal, at least longer range. Comes in handy. Whenever you get a new carrier, you want to upgrade at least 2 of the plane types and have the Air Groups Mod 1 before you take the carrier out into battle. If you don't wait until you do that, you're going to have a very hard time because you're just not going to have the health or the damage output or even the speed in some cases that you would otherwise have. So, make sure you upgrade your stuff before you take it out. It's a minor annoyance, but that's the way it is. For picking a tree to go down, the Japanese have the better torpedo planes. They attack in larger... It sends more planes at once in multiple groups, which basically means you can attack more often, but you will have issues of you will lose more planes. The torps hit hard though. They also have attack aircraft that are HE, which basically means they set fires, and I do recommend using HE for the attack aircraft for the highly for the targets with lots of anti-air, because it can knock out anti-air guns, which should make things slightly easier. They also have armor-piercing bombers, which is good against pretty much anything. Well, good against anything except for destroyers. They do good damage if you're lucky. Most of the time, you're not lucky. They're still decent, though. Just annoying. For the US, you have basically the same thing as the Japanese. The Japanese planes are among the fastest as well, and they're paper thin, so they die quick, which is unfortunate, but that's the way it is. The US has HE or fire attack aircraft. They do good damage. They're decently fast. They're, for the most part, at the lower tiers, like below tier 8, they're fine. The Lexington with the ones with the Tiny Tims are somewhat annoying in that they take longer to fire. Like, you start a run, you select fire, and then there's a delay before it actually fires the rockets to do damage. During that time, it's easy for anyone to just turn either away from them or into them, reducing the amount of damage that they take. which sort of screws you over. But they do good damage if you can get the hits. Their torpedo bombers aren't bad. They do really good damage, but they're slow. Which means you need to lead more with them. It's a real pain in the butt. But if you can hit with them, great. Their bombers are high explosive, so really good at setting fires. They do more consistent damage than the Japanese bombers, and they're really good at setting fires. They're pretty much one of the main reasons you'd go with the US. The Russians, their attack aircraft are good. They hit hard. When the Russians attack, you use all of the planes that you sent. So instead of getting, like, with the attack aircraft on the Ryujo, you'd have like 4 chances to attack. It'd basically be more like 2 or 3. With the Russians, you just attack with all of them at once. Good damage, but you need to lead a lot more with them because they have the longest delay between when you choose to attack and when the attack actually comes out. Their torpedo bombers, not bad, but their torpedoes have a really long arming distance, so good luck hitting much of anything other than battleships with them. And they have skip bombers. Skip bombers have multiple lines. As long as you're hitting a ship in those lines, or as long as the line's over your target, it should hit. Skip bombers do decent damage. They're pretty good at starting fires. They're generally good. It can be frustrating hitting destroyers, but if you can, they do good damage. For the Germans, you have really fast planes, slightly faster than the Japanese, but they're also more paper thin than the Japanese, so you will probably lose them more, but they're faster. They aim up faster as well. Their rockets are armor piercing, which means you basically need to hit them or hit your target's broadside and don't bother attacking destroyers with them because you're not going to do much of anything to them. It's annoying, but it is the way it is. Their torpedo bombers are good. They're fast. They do decent enough damage. The German planes all aim up quickly, so you don't need to worry about that sight stabilization thing to make them aim up faster. Their bombers are armor-piercing bombers, good damage against pretty much everything that's not a destroyer. Because of the distance that they typically fly up, they are pretty RNG reliant, so good luck with that. Their secondaries, they might not have a lot of them, but they're accurate and they have good range. So your main defense against destroyers is, well, your secondaries. For the UK, they're a lot like the US, but more reliant on starting fires. Their attack aircraft with HE rockets, so fire-starting rockets, similar delays to the American and the Japanese. They don't hit quite as hard, they don't have as much armor piercing, their chances to start fires aren't quite as good, but they're still somewhat decent. The planes are kind of like the US in that they're slower, sort of, but they're also tankier. They can take more damage before being destroyed, so they should last longer in runs. The torpedo bombers are similar to the US in that they do good damage, but they're extremely slow. There are some ships that can outrun these, which is annoying, but it is what it is. The UK bombers are carpet bombers, which in theory means you have good chances of starting fires, and you kinda do, but at the same time, they're not reliable enough to really rely on. They have bad armor penetration chance, so they won't... If they're not setting fires, chances are they're not doing much of anything for you. Which is frustrating because setting fires with them reliably isn't really a thing you can do. They definitely need the pyrotechnician skill if you're going to run UK carriers. The Bearn is... the Bearn has decent planes, armor-piercing bombers, and, well, HE skip bombers, which are fine, but they're not great. It takes too long for them to start their attack runs for the skip bombers, which gives people plenty of time to turn, which makes it much harder to hit, which means you do less damage. They're slow, well, slower than the others. They're not super tanky, they're not great, but the fighters are pretty good. And I guess we'll go into a battle and start going on about how you should pick your targets. So, at the start of every battle, it's a good idea to pay attention to what ships you're up against. Some have better anti-air than others. This can cause issues.
I designed it myself.
Some are more dangerous than others. It's a good idea to keep an eye out for what submarines you're going to be up against. Or not submarines, carriers. Because it sort of determines what type of planes you're going to be dealing with. Also, when starting out, you want to launch planes immediately. It doesn't really matter which squadron type you use. Some people argue that it does. To me, it doesn't. As long as you're sending something, it doesn't really matter. We just look around for a bit, drop fighters so that they can spot.
The fighter took off, despite the meteorological conditions.
The Lion has better broadside, and I don't see a cruiser near it. So, the New Orleans seems to have good anti-air, which is kind of a problem. As it means we risk losing planes there. Generally, you just pick targets based on what you can see. If you see something off on its own, then it's better to go for that, because there will be less anti-air to protect it. The Japanese ships, like the Nagato, have very little anti-air, so they're really easy to pick targets. When it comes to picking an angle to attack from, broadside's always ideal, but it's not always doable, and you will probably miss drops a lot. It's a good idea to constantly speed up and slow down. Speed up to get there, slow down to help aim, and generally it helps with getting there, helps with aiming, or if you need to pick a different target. Like here, I'm not going to be able to do anything to either of these ships because of how they're angled, but I'm going to try. When your sights are green like this, you take reduced damage from all sources. This is extremely useful because, well, you take reduced damage, so that means your planes will live a bit longer. During that orange phase, they take normal damage. You can dip below the, well, everyone refers to it as black cotton candy, which is useful because you don't want to eat the black cotton candy. It's not good for you, it's not good for your planes, and if you do so, you will regret it. You can't always dodge it, but you should always try. And here we're stuck losing planes to anti-air because we need to deal with this target, because if we don't, they're going to start capturing. And hopefully the healing actually holds up. If it doesn't, then that's a problem. If it does, then great. The reason I've been using torpedo bombers pretty much the entire time is because for the Kaga, that's the best planes that they've got. And if you hold Alt, you can see, well, by default it's Alt, you can see your plane reserves down at the bottom and how long it takes for them to regenerate. This is probably already dead, but might as well.
So I've been crunching some numbers.
Yeah, it's
shows
gone.
that our team has gained an advantage.
So ideally you basically just pick targets based on what you can see. If a lot of things, if all of your targets are in the same spot, relatively, then pick whatever's easiest to hit, or failing that, you go with whatever has the least amount of health. It's a bad shot, but it's either that or just lose the planes. If you're going to do an attack run, I highly recommend that you... At the bottom, you can see sort of little green bars. That determines how much, or that tells you how much health your planes have, and how many you have that are out in the squadron. If you basically want one full one at all times, that will be the one that does damage, and then like here, this tells me I can do one more drop safely. I wouldn't bother using those last planes, I would just recall after doing the drop. So you drop, you skip the animation, and then you immediately recall. And you basically need to be doing this all the time, constantly. Now, at the start of the match, I did hide behind an island, as this is asymmetrical and you really don't want to be seen because you will die. If there's an opportunity to move closer to your targets without being seen, it might be worth taking, because the closer you are to your targets, the more aggressive with your planes you can be. If you're doing co-op, then just be as aggressive as you can be. Like, select the other side of the map, change your speed to 3/4, and just let the autopilot do its thing. Because there's no point in hiding in co-op, because they don't last long enough for it to really matter. Now here, I'm probably going to lose to those fighters. Quite a few planes. I'll still try to drop since I didn't bother to recall. Not a good drop, but it still hit. And did not penetrate, so bad drop in general.
Autopilot on! I designed it myself.
The autopilot is not smart. You will have to rely on it, but it's not smart. If anyone's asking for anti-air support, and you're nowhere near them, or your planes aren't anywhere near them, then don't worry about it. If you don't have fighters, then just because you use them all for spotting, then generally don't worry about it. If possible, you want to use fighters for both spotting and anti-air. That's not always possible, but ideally. Not sure what that Izumo's doing.
It was as beautiful as a supernova.
Some people tell you to just spot constantly, which is, if you're spotting, it's sort of helping, but at the same time, you want to be doing damage.
I need help. Sincerely.
If your team's decent enough, then they'll be able to attack things from you spotting stuff from just going to attack stuff. If they're not, then, well, you're kind of screwed anyway. You don't always get good angles. Like here, I'm not going to get a good angle on this, but I'm still going to try to drop on it. For sharp turns, you basically use WASD for minute turns. When your planes are facing head-on, you can just use the mouse. This helps for picking, or for lining stuff up better. When it comes to deciding what planes to use, usually you go with whatever you have the best of until you don't have enough to send anymore, and then you just swap to either your next best or just something else until you have more that you can send. If you're capable of it, it's recommended to go after destroyers first, then maybe cruisers, then battleships, but that's not always possible, and well, for example, I struggle with hitting anything smaller than a cruiser, so I just go for cruisers and battleships just because I can't hit anything else. And easy victory. Oh, Pommern and Ruprecht. That explains it. If you do not have premium, then chances are you will lose credits running anything higher than tier 6. If you have premium, you will probably lose credits running anything higher than tier 8. Unless the ship is premium, in which case you don't have to worry about it so much. Let's go with... Yeah, let's go with Parseval this time. I highly recommend trying out each of the tech trees up to tier 6, because the tier 2s don't really tell you much of anything.
Autopilot on! I designed
To
it
determine
myself.
which of the tech tree carriers you like best.
Let's do it by the book. A battle is just a combat.
After this battle, I might do a training one just to show off, or just to do a carrier versus carrier thing to show off, well, combating a carrier. As you can see, I pretty much always start off with the torpedo planes because, well, torpedoes hit hardest. Ideally, you want to keep some of your boost bars so that when you go to do attack runs, you can speed up or slow down as you deem necessary.
That there is an enemy force. The fighter took off, despite the meteorological conditions.
And we found a destroyer to pick on. It's always difficult to determine how much you need to lead for destroyers because they're so fast. As long as you get at least one hit, I call that a win. Nice.
Enemy destroyer sunk. Fighter destroyed.
I have enough planes to try to drop on something else, so I'm just going to do that, and More torpedo bombers. And that flood's still there, so that's nice. And we have a cyclone inbound. That should make things interesting.
The fighter took off, despite the meteorological conditions.
I usually use fighters for spotting because they don't really do great when it comes to anti-air. If you're facing players and not bots, then they'll just avoid it. Which pretty much means you might as well just use all of your planes for spotting. Unless you're the Bearn, in which case you just use your planes for whatever. That was a bad drop. I thought it would be going faster, but it's not. Oh well, it works out. That Pommern should be able to kill it. If it doesn't, then, well, it'll die eventually. And I think the Pommern's showing a bit of broadside. Unfortunate, but it's kinda how it goes. The ship you should be trying to keep an eye out for is anything from the UK, because they have enhanced anti-air, and anything from the US because they typically just have a lot of anti-air. Well, that's dead, so that's good. At this point, it's just pick whatever you can hit and whatever has the lowest HP and hope for the best. Now, asymmetric battle is one of those cases of carriers excel at. It's a fairly long battle, and the bots don't actually hunt you down. Now, unfortunately, this is a bad drop attempt, so I had to use a heal and wait until the run ended so that I can start again. Well, that works. This time, I guess I'm going to use dive bombers. Not for any particular reason, but just because I want to. Now, chances are these guys want me to spot, so I guess I'll go spot. There's that.
The fighter took off, despite the meteorological
And there's the
conditions.
destroyer. Ideally, my allies would deal with the destroyer, but I don't expect them to. And good hit. Might as well recall since I'm not going to have a full group of planes to attack with. Yeah, if you don't have extra planes to act as a buffer right after you drop, you might as well just recall, or else you're pretty much going to be wasting your time. There's no point in attacking with a less than full group unless you absolutely have to. Not a great drop, but it did do some damage. That should do good damage. Yep, all three hit. I do have a mod that makes the black cotton candy see-through, so you can actually see where you're going with your planes. By default, it's just black clouds of death and despair. So I strongly recommend Aslane's mod pack just to do that. This Nagato is lined up. We start the run before we get over the ship. And good to go. I usually recommend starting the run just before your reticle would be on the ship, like here. Because that way you have the best chances of hitting.
Autopilot on.
And at this point I might as well just send my carrier in, which normally I wouldn't do, but it's just bots, so who cares. They might be accurate bots, but still just bots. The only thing I'm seeing on the map is that Nagato, so I'm probably going to drop on it. Most likely won't get the kill, but I might as well. Never know when your allies are going to miss, or if they're going to ricochet.
The enemy battleship went down.
Or just not pen. I'm just going to use a heal so that I can actually use that last squadron. Attack, flight, whatever. The AP rockets on the German carriers are best used against cruisers, and that's pretty much it. If you hit a cruiser broadside or almost broadside, then it does a lot of damage. But if you try to use that against a battleship, you're probably not going to do much. You can use islands for the German rocket planes to sort of slingshot them, or slingshot the rockets forward. I recommend you start your run before you go over the island, or whenever a ship is in range of what you think the slingshot's going to be like. That gives you extra range, and it generally helps a lot. I did not show a victory for that. It did pretty good. Did some damage to quite a few things. Made credits. Worked out. Now... I think I'll do Russian this time. I usually don't do random ranked or clan. Our clan doesn't have enough people on at a specific time to do clan battles, so we don't do that. I don't do ranked battle because I generally avoid PvP because I don't need people insulting me for either their screw-ups or me not sending planes to protect them because they decided to avoid being near other allies that has anti-air like cruisers. It's just a big pain in the rear end. I usually don't play at the higher tiers either, like tier 8 and 10 when I do randoms, because at the higher tiers people are much better at dodging and it can be an annoyance. I think I'll do training. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'll just do 1v1, no restrictions. Now we'll do husband. And for the bot, since this is for demonstration purposes, I think yeah, let's go with the Eagle. Every squadron type has a different icon on the minimap. It's a good idea to keep an eye on that on the minimap, because that generally tells you what's going on in general, which is important to keep track of. The enemy, the bots, generally don't actively dodge planes, so it's much easier to hit them than it is players. They also don't actively avoid when you send fighters or drop fighters.
Okay, we're here. What now?
Which means if I do something like this,
Despite the meteorological conditions,
I shouldn't have to worry about most of those. They will probably hit, so I'm going to want to set my autopilot to go towards them since they're torpedo bombers. That way when they drop torpedoes, I should dodge most of them.
Judging by my patented mega deductor.
And there's the carrier.
There is an enemy force. Drop your protractors. We've got torpedoes straight ahead.
Yeah, look at that delay. The rockets are so nice. And it looks like more torpedoes. Well, if it keeps sending those, then it's not going to have many planes to actually attack with.
Despite the meteorological conditions.
So that works out. Let's see here, we start our attack run, and we speed up to elongate the aiming thing, drop, hope that it hits. It does. Oh, attack planes this time. For those, you basically want to autopilot towards them. You're still a really big target and will probably take most of the rockets, but you also might take reduced damage compared to getting hit in the side.
Fighter took off, despite the meteorological conditions.
The bots also will occasionally try to maneuver into the proper side while in your anti-air, which means they just lose their planes.
I'm launching an attack.
Russian torpedoes. Gonna drop here because if I don't, I'm gonna lose more planes. If the Eagle used bombers, like dive bombers or carpet bombers, then I'd want to try to show those planes broadside. Just because I would then take reduced damage.
I'm launching an attack.
As you can see, I'm not taking any damage yet because the bots are pretty crap when it comes to carriers. They can still hit you, but they're just generally not good.
The fighter took off, despite the meteorological conditions.
Now, unfortunately, I'm going to lose this squadron to fighters. Yep. I should have recalled there, and I didn't. And yeah, I still took damage. Oh well. That should keep it spotted.
The meteorological conditions.
which is somewhat useful in deciding how you want to aim up your attack runs. Not the greatest drop, but it should still do good damage. Nope. Because it dropped fighters close to my carrier, I don't need to worry about them, because my anti-air should kill them off before they kill off all of my
Everything is back
planes.
to normal. Don't panic.
And now that it's running from me, I might wish I would have recalled this and swamped. But I didn't, so I'll see if I can make it work.
The fighter took off, despite the meteorological
Yeah, that's not
conditions.
If you're running random battles, I strongly recommend, if you get up tiered, as in you end up running like a tier 6 and it puts you up against a bunch of tier 8s, what you're going to want to do is spend most of your time spotting. You will want to pre-drop, which is fire off some of your squadrons into the ocean until you only have 2 left to attack with. 1 to take damage for you, and 1 to do damage with. Now obviously that's not possible to do with Russian carriers,
Autopilot on. I designed it myself.
but for the Russian carriers you basically just attack from long range.
The fighter took off, despite the meteorological conditions.
Yeah, those might work, but they might not. Yeah, fighters are going. For the most part, islands make it easier to avoid most types of attacks from planes. On the other hand, it can also block your anti-air. So if you're too tight, you risk your anti-air being useless. If you're not tight enough, then you just risk not being able to avoid taking damage from certain attacks. Hopefully that hits, but I don't expect it to. More attack planes, so I'm just gonna go towards them.
Despite the meteorological conditions.
This time, see if I can avoid the giant circle. Red circle, bad. That's death, despair. More annoyance than anything. Oh hey, some of those torpedoes hit. That's nice. You won't always hit with every drop. Don't expect to. Takes a lot of practice. And if people actually know how to dodge your planes, or at least reduce the damage that they take, then it can be a pain. and it can turn an easy fight into a long, drawn-out one. But you might be able to trick people into showing broadside when they really don't want to. And if your allies are smart, they'll take advantage of it. If they're not, then they won't. And that drop didn't do much. Don't have to worry about those fighters. For submarines, you basically want to move in ways that they would not expect. So you basically want to do curves, S's, donuts, whatever. If they're within range of your anti-submarine planes, when they ping you, they will have depth charges dropped on them automatically. If they're seen, then they will have depth charges dropped on them automatically. So all you have to do is just make sure... Well, this is bad.
Autopilot? Where we're going, we don't need autopilot.
And it's dead. Just make sure that you live longer than the submarine, and you should be able to survive the submarine attack. Secondaries also work. For against destroyers, if you're German or Russian, you're probably fine if you boosted your secondaries. For everybody else, good luck. Always remember to be constantly turning if you have destroyers nearby. If you dodge their torps, then they have to wait to reload, and during that time, if they're within range, you either get rid of them or you get real lucky and dodge more torps. If possible, don't show broadside to battleships, which is obvious, but some carriers just go and hide. I'll do a co-op just to show off. Let's see here. Go with a lesser, maybe. No, let's do the Ranger. Oh, when you start an attack run, I don't remember if I mentioned this, but if it's green, you take reduced damage. If it's not, then you just take full damage, which I'm pretty sure I mentioned, but mentioning it now just because you never know. So I might as well do DBA.
I designed it myself.
3/4. The bots in co-op aren't accurate. They're decent with torps, but other than torpedoes, they're just not accurate.
May the smartest one win.
So you don't have to worry too much about dying off to them. At the higher tiers, you basically want to run at probably 3/4 to half speed in co-op, just because they can hit so much harder.
Okay, we're here. What now?
And not seeing anything yet, but we've got New York there and Omaha. The Omaha is bad news.
The fighter took off, despite the meteorological conditions. Enemy forces are on the horizon.
And there's the Furious. I'd rather take on the Omaha. I do recommend learning how to attack from pretty much any angle, because you can't always get perfect broadside. When you're dealing with other players, they will dodge if they're smart. If they're not, then they won't. And then they'll complain because you killed them because they didn't dodge.
I'm launching an attack.
Not a great drop, but it'll do. I take it back, that was fine.
The enemy's cruiser went down.
The Nicholas is problematic. If they have anti-air tracers that are red, then that means they have an anti-air defensive consumable, which means they will do a lot more damage to your planes. And that's bad, because you need planes. Unless you're German, and then you still want planes. Now I think I'm gonna go for the New York. Kinda screwed by RNG. You generally don't want to go after carriers because they have good anti-air. But if you can take out the enemy carrier at the start of a match, then that could be useful. But at the same time, if they're competent carriers and they realize that you're going for them, if they're dodging, then you're just wasting your time that could be spent on going after other things. Now in my older videos, I had a thing where I would do like this. That used to be a thing, or at least I think it was. It's not anymore, so don't bother. That hit and did decent. Well, at least one of those is gonna hit. Well, maybe both.
We're coming in hot.
Slow down. Not a good drop, but that should still hit.
I divided the distance by our speed, and there you have it. Waypoint reached.
I'm gonna head towards where the submarine is.
The enemy battleship went down. I swear by Archimedes, we're on it.
If you need to drop and recall, don't be afraid to do so. If you need to just recall for any reason, like you were going to do an attack and it just doesn't work out, then just feel free to do so.
We're coming in hot.
Yeah, I don't think this can do damage. Oh, it did. Must have changed that. Usually when submarines go underwater even a little bit, they can't take damage, but it seems like they've changed that. You can torp a submarine. I have done it. Don't rely on it. You probably won't be able to do it. If you're nowhere near a submarine to deal with it, just drop fighters over it to keep it spotted. And hope that your allies are smart enough to deal with it. If they're not, then they won't. If they are, they will. Sometimes they're not in a position to do so, but sometimes they are and they just don't. The Tier 4 carriers, I recommend treating less as an introduction to that tree type and more just as an introduction to carriers in general. Use that as practice for aiming and not as practice for what the higher tiers of this tree is going to be like, because at the lowest tiers they're just not good, and I just keep them around in case my brother or somebody else wants to run something really low tier, like tier 4 or 5, and yeah. Treat tier 6 as a perfecting your aim and getting a feel for what the higher tiers are going to be like. Tier 8 is basically tier 6 but faster. More anti-air, stronger anti-air, just tier 6 but more. Tier 10 is tier 8 but faster and a bit more. I can't really give you advice on hitting things in random other than just practice and hope that your opponents aren't super great at turning. Make sure that you lead, or you learn to lead with your pretty much everything. A good thing to keep in mind is if you're going to be swapping between different carrier types, like Japanese and US, or UK and German or whatever, is missing with the first drop or 3 is fine, because the speed difference between the torps is large enough that it will throw you off if you swap. So if you're still not hitting after the first 3 drops, then you're out of practice, and that just means just practice more. As for picking targets, any of the UK ships are going to be pain and suffering. The US ships, pain and suffering. Germans, you'll do fine against Germans. Japanese basically don't really have anti-air. Some of their cruisers might, but their battleships generally don't. So Japanese are the general best targets. Ideally, you want to go for destroyers, then cruisers, then battleships. If someone is capturing your point, I recommend using whatever you can to stop them. Don't be afraid to sacrifice yourself if you have to. Your ships have, your carriers have secondaries. They're not good secondaries, but they're there. You have more than one hit point. If you have to tank, then do so. Ideally, you don't want to do so. Keep an eye on the map, because if you don't, you will have issues at times. I recommend keeping an eye on the map, choosing when to move up, when to move back, when to hide. Generally try not to have your carrier seen. Usually where you see the plane, the direction the planes are coming from, that's usually where the enemy carrier is. And that should basically do it. Everything else is just practice and repetition. I'm not good with remembering which ships have anti-air, good anti-air, but the easiest way to find out is lose a bunch of planes to them, and then you know for the rest of the battle, don't go for that ship. So I think that's going to do it. Thanks for watching. If you have any other questions, then feel free to ask in the comments, and have a good day.